All right, so in our last class, we had gone over basically your theory of evolution, right? And in our theory of evolution, we had discussed how natural selection actually takes place. Now, along with natural selection, there is one more thing that we have to take a look at, and that is the evolutionary tree. What is the evolutionary tree? So the evolutionary tree is basically a diagram that is drawn to show the relationship between different species. What does this mean? What this means is this, that let's say that there are two species of bird. Okay. Now, before they evolved, they used to be a part of the same species. Let's say that at one point, both the birds were the part of the same species. Then, due to your isolation, due to genetic variation, whatever, that one species of bird evolved into two different species. So I can show that by using what? I can show that by I can show that by using the concept of my um, evolutionary tree. One second, let me draw this for you. Hold on. Okay. So our evolutionary tree might, for example, you might end up finding yourself looking at some diagram like this. Okay. So we had, let's say that you and I are studying the link between two different species of panda, right? We can have the giant panda and we can have our red panda. So now, when you and I decide to study the evolutionary tree, what we'll be studying? We will be studying the we will be studying we will be studying the how those organisms evolved. Okay. So, for example, let's say that we have a red panda and we have in fact, you know what? Instead of drawing it, I'll show this to you easier and faster.
In my textbook, there is no like diagram or anything actually.
Yeah, it's not given in your textbook. They give it in past paper questions. I know they haven't mentioned it, but it comes in the past paper questions. That's why I have to go with this with you. All right, so this is what an evolutionary tree actually looks like. I know it's not mentioned in your textbook. That's because it's not normally taught, but they give these kind of questions in past papers exam, and then students don't know how to answer them. This is what your evolutionary tree looks like. Okay. So in an evolutionary tree, basically, as you can see now, if we read this diagram, we can see that we have, for example, a raccoon and a red panda. So if I say panda, red panda, you would say that, okay, miss, obviously a red panda and a giant panda are going to be closely related to each other because they are both pandas, right? They both belong to the same group. They both belong to the same classification. They're both pandas. Yes, there might be different species of pandas, but they are both pandas. So obviously they must be closely related. But when you study the evolutionary tree, right, you realize that the relationship between the organisms is quite different than what you would normally expect. How do the scientists make an evolutionary tree? Normally they use DNA. All right. They take the DNA of two species, they study them, and they compare them to each other. So the scientists actually found that, let's say, at one point we had some organism. Okay. That organism evolved to give us what to give us two different species. That organism evolved to give us two different species. Then these two different species evolve further to give us a raccoon and a red panda. So you can see that despite what you would expect, a red panda shares a common ancestor with the raccoon. The most recent common ancestor that a panda shares is with the raccoon, not with the giant panda. Both the raccoon and the panda evolved from the same ancestor, right? Which is not what you would expect. The raccoon and the red panda evolved from the same ancestor. So this is so this is right. So this is what I was saying about the evolutionary tree. The evolutionary tree allows us to the evolutionary tree allows us to make it so, right, that I can actually figure out which organisms are closely related to each other, which species are closely related to each other. So if you look over here, the giant panda, okay, and these bears, they all share a common ancestor. Then the over here, once again, you can see that the speckled bear, sloth bear, sun bear, polar bear, black bear, they all evolved from the same ancestor. And similarly, you can see the black bear and the polar bear once again evolved from the same ancestor. This is known as an evolutionary tree. So an evolutionary tree allows you to see the relationship between All right. So the evolutionary tree basically allows you to what? It allows you to go ahead and study the relationship between different species, and it allows you to figure out when did they possibly evolve, what was the common ancestor that they had, how did the evolution of these organisms take place. So this is what an evolutionary tree is. Now, talking about our evolution, right? We cannot just talk about evolution, or we cannot finish the topic of evolution without first talking about our fossils and talking about your extinction, right? Because as you know, that a lot of the species that we currently have that used to be here at some point have become extinct. One of the biggest examples is obviously your dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are now considered to be extinct. Your dodo birds, they are considered to be extinct. So throughout the history, right, a lot. So basically what is going to happen is this, that simply put, if a species does not survive, if a species does not adapt to the changing environment, it is at a risk of extinction. Okay. If any species does not adapt to the changing environment, it is at a risk of developing extinction, right? Those species that cannot cope to these changes, they will eventually die out. And big example of this is your dodo birds, right? They could not adapt to the environment that was changing, and eventually they went extinct. Now, when we talk about extinction, what are the causes of extinction? Okay, causes of extinction can include predators. Predators are a really, really, really big example of this. Okay, if there are some organisms in our ecosystem, in our habitat, that do not have natural predators. Okay, there might be, and this is something that has happened throughout the history, by the way. That there might be an island where a certain okay, let's say we have a species of insect that is found on a certain island. On that island, there are right. So on that island, there are no spiders. So those insects thrive, they grow very well. Now, let's say that some person who was exploring, who was, going around, he said, you know what, why don't I introduce some spiders? There are no spiders over here. Why don't I introduce spiders in this ecosystem? So when you will introduce the spiders, what might happen? Those spiders might start to prey on that insect. And if that insect cannot adapt, if that insect cannot develop some resistance or some features that will allow it to fight that spider or to survive that spider, it is eventually going to become extinct. So predators are a huge, huge, huge cause of your extinction, right? And this has actually happened where humans have introduced organisms in the ecosystem where they were not there, right? They go to an area where some organism is not found, and the humans will introduce it thinking it's going to be helpful, but more often than not, it disrupts the ecosystem, it disrupts the balance, and it can end up causing the extinction of certain species. So predation is a number one cause, or one of the major causes that can cause any species to become extinct. And when I say predators, I am not talking about animal predators only. I'm talking about human predators that often do hunting, right? Under hunting, a lot of our elephants, different species of elephants, have, for example, now become endangered, and they are at the risk of becoming extinct if we do not change the way. So we have our predators. Okay. Then maybe there can be a disease, a new disease, right? A new disease that might suddenly spread through, right? And if the people do not obviously if the people or the animals or organisms, if they do not develop adaptations in time to allow them to survive, they will become extinct. And then obviously competition is when there are, let's say, one species of bird is already on that island. It there is suddenly, for example, a change in the competition. Maybe there was flooding. Maybe there was some natural disaster, due to which some other species of bird has now become part of the island. Now, the two species of birds are competing with each other for food, for habitat, for shelter, and if the second species is more successful, if the second species is better at getting the resources, it's better at reproducing, it's better at getting shelter, it will survive, and the other species of birds might become extinct, right? So these are some major causes that we can actually have. So predators, any new predator, right, that is introduced into the environment, right, they can actually cause a species to become extinct very quickly. Because why? Because the prey animals cannot develop adaptations to avoid them. If they manage to obviously make some get some adaptations, so well and good. But if the prey animals cannot develop adaptations to avoid the predators, what is going to happen? That this can cause the species to become extinct. So, if we have introduced a predator into the environment, what may happen? That the death rate will become higher than the birth rate. This is the main sentence that you should include in your answer. The death rate of the organisms will become higher than their birth rate. So as the number of organisms reduce, so will the offspring, right? If there are less organisms being born and less organisms of that species that are reproducing, so obviously less and less offspring will be produced as well. Eventually, the numbers will reduce so much that they might actually end up becoming extinct. And I'll give you an example of this. There was in Australia, from Australia, okay? There was this island that is known as island of Guam. So around, no, not around, after World War II, in fact, some humans accidentally brought the brown tree snake from Australia to that remote island. What happened that that species of snake was not present on that island before. So when the humans brought it with them, that species obviously it did not have any, the snakes did not have any natural predator. So they reproduced like insane. And a lot of the species of birds on that island became extinct, right? Because this was suddenly I've introduced a new predator. The birds did not get time to adapt, because that's the thing. Evolution is not a snap process. Evolution took million and million and million of years. So the changes have to be gradual. But if we introduce a sudden new predator, then obviously the organisms will not have time to adapt. Same thing is true for new diseases. Okay. So and a disease that spreads very rapidly It can easily spread through an entire species and cause them to become extinct. And finally, competition, right? Because of successful competition, the new species is more successful at getting resources, it's more successful at getting shelter. So it might make it so that the species that is more successful will survive. The species that is less successful will be at a risk of becoming extinct. So extinction can happen because of any of these reasons. Then there is one major reason that I have not mentioned yet, and that is environmental changes. This can be flooding. This, for example, for the dinosaurs, the scientists believe that a large meteor hit the earth that caused the dinosaurs to become extinct. Then, what about climate change, right? Now, if you ever study the history of the planet Earth, so you will see that your planet Earth, actually the temperatures are quite cyclic. The Earth becomes very, very, very hot. After the Earth becomes very, very, very hot, the temperature drops and then it becomes so cold that the Earth enters into an ice age. After which the temperatures rise once again, reaching a very high and then falling down. And this is a proper cyclic pattern. Like if you actually want to study it, you can study it. This is true. So this has been seen multiple cycles of this have run since the earth have been formed, where the climate gets high, then ice age, temperature gets very high, ice age, temperature gets very high, ice age. If we follow what the pattern is, we might be seeing ice age in another 100, 200, 300 years, maybe 500 years, 1,000 years from now. The earth might enter into another ice age. So once again, those organisms that were able to survive in the ice age will not be able to survive in the tropical climates. Those organisms that can survive in tropical climate, they will not be able to survive in the ice age. So that is another reason why a lot of the species that used to at one point be on the earth have now become extinct. Now, I told you that for evolution to happen, right? If you remember, we had discussed for evolution to happen, these are the factors. Evolution can happen because of isolation, genetic variation, natural selection, or speciation. So, let's go ahead and just talk about isolation a little bit more. Okay, when we talk about isolation, so I told you one of the major isolation that can happen, and the commonest one is geographical isolation. Okay, in geographical isolation, what happens? In geographical isolation, what happens that the two populations, right? The two populations of the same species may become separated from each other due to may become separated from each other physically due to a geographical barrier. Now, this might be, like, for example, there is a flooding, and that flooding caused a new river to form. Maybe there was some earthquake that caused a new hill, a new mountain, a sudden change in the geography of the island. Right? For example, if I give you an example, Australia is home to a lot of species that are not found anywhere else. There are lots of species of animals that are found exclusively in Australia, right? That is because, like you know, that Australia is separate from a lot of the other continents, right? Like Australia is on its own a complete continent. And over 5 million years ago, due to your, shifting of the ocean, shifting of the continental plates, Australia broke off from the mainland and it moved away into the ocean. And it basically became an island. Now, what does that do for you and me? What that does is this, that since there were since those animals, right, were geographically isolated, they were unable to travel to any of the other continents because obviously the Australia had completely moved away, detached from the other land masses. So they evolved into those organisms that are only found now in Australia. A good example of these organisms that are only found in Australia are your marsupials, right? Marsupial are mammals that carry babies in their pouches. For example, like your kangaroo, like your koala bear, all of these are marsupials. Now, what has happened is that, like I said, these are found mostly in Australia. And the reason for that is that Australia got geographically isolated. So these organisms evolved in Australia and they are not found anywhere else. Now, so over here we have to talk about one term. The reason we have to talk about the term is endemic. What does the term endemic mean? Endemic means endemic means that this specific species is only found in one certain area. When a species is found only in one certain area, we say that the species is endemic to that area, right? And usually the species become endemic due to geographical isolation. So that is what geographical isolation is. Now, so geographical isolation, like I told you, can lead to what? It can lead to your evolution happening. Then, as you know that we have genetic variation. Okay. Now, what happened that genetic variation means that we have a wide range of alleles that control different characteristics. Now, in each population, the alleles which are selected will control characteristics which help the organism to survive and breed successfully. In each population, only those alleles will be selected which help the organisms to survive and breed successfully. This is known as natural selection, right? Then what will happen that alleles for characteristics that enable organisms to survive and breed successfully uh, in breed successfully are going to be passed on from parent to offspring. One second. Right. So as a result, the alleles that allow them to survive will be passed on from parent to offspring. So as a result, what will happen that gradually the characteristic features of these organisms will change. Eventually, they will no longer be able to breed with each other, and this is known as speciation. So this is basically how the process of evolution actually happens. So it starts from isolation. After isolation, what will happen? That we will have genetic variation. Due to genetic variation, due to the fact that each characteristic is um, different alleles or a wide range of alleles, control different characteristics, right? So genetic variation ensures that there is a wide range of alleles that will control different characteristics. Now, because of isolation and genetic variation, we can see natural selection. What is natural selection? Natural selection is when the allele that offers the best chance of survival will be selected and inherited from parent to offspring. Eventually, and gradually, the populations develop varying features and different adaptations until they are no longer able to breed and have fertile offspring. This is known as speciation. Now they have both evolved into two different species. So this is basically how your entire process of evolution happens. Right, Esmith? Is this making sense? Any confusion?
No.
Okay.
Can we also go through
Yeah.
the adaptations of plants and animals, because that's also mentioned in my textbook.
I'm sorry, can you repeat yourself?
Adaptations of animals and plants. That is mentioned in my textbook.
Yeah, okay. So, okay, now you don't need to know any specific adaptations. In your textbooks, the ones that are given are more for an example base to actually explain to you what is the concept behind it, right? There are so the adaptations that are mentioned in your textbook, you don't have to learn the adaptations because the adaptations, like I said, are mentioned more for the purpose of explaining, right, the entire concept of evolution, that oh, we had this particular species and then it developed this adaptation and it evolved, it became a different species. So the adaptations can vary. Okay, we can go over some of the common adaptations that are seen in organisms, but keep in mind that you should not focus that much on adaptation. You should focus more on understanding how does evolution actually happen. And once you understand how does evolution actually happen, right, you need to be able to answer your past paper questions where they will provide you with a scenario. Okay, they will tell you that oh, we had this organism and this organism developed these adaptations. Explain the process of evolution. How did the organism develop these adaptations? So that is what you need to be able to answer. How are they evolving? How are they developing adaptations? You don't need to concentrate too much on the actual adaptations because every single, think of the number of plants and animals we have, right? Every plant, every animal is going to have completely different adaptations. So you don't have to concentrate on that. That is mostly given for the sake of example. Okay. Even in your specification, right, your syllabus, they have not mentioned that you need to know about the adaptations. You need to understand the concept behind it. Okay. But yeah, we will cover, I will cover the different adaptations with you as well. That is fine, there's no problem. But I'm just letting you know, don't focus too much on actually learning the adaptations. Okay, before we go with the adaptations though, let me just show you what kind of questions you will actually see in your exam. Hold on. See, take a look at this question. This is the kind of questions you're going to get. Okay, so they're not going to ask you what is the adaptation, right? The one that's mentioned in your textbook are usually just for the sake of explaining to you uh, the concept behind it. You'll get questions like this. The image below shows Fioma, an ancestor of elephants, and a modern African elephant. Fioma lived about 35 million years ago. Both Fioma and the African elephant reach up into trees to get leaves. In the 1800s, Darwin and Lamarck had different theories about how the long nose of Fioma evolved into the trunk of the African elephant. Use Darwin's theory of natural selection to explain how the elephant's trunk evolved. So that this is the kind of questions you're going to get. They're going to give you a scenario like this. And after giving you the scenario, they're basically just going to say, all right, now explain to us by using the theory of natural selection or whatever, how did this actually happen? So this is for 4 months. We have discussed Darwin's theory of natural selection already. Can you go ahead, like just, you don't have to give me a detailed answer, but what do you think? How should we answer this question?
Like mentioning the isolation.
Yes.
Isolation and genetic variation and all that.
Okay. Okay, so we have to keep our answer a bit on the topic of Darwin's theory though. So Darwin, basically, what did he notice? He noticed that for every single species, right, is develops adaptations that allow it to survive in different environments. And those adaptations are then passed from those adaptations are passed from the parents to the offspring, right? So keep in mind that at the time of Darwin, the theory of the process of evolution that we have discussed this, the most recent one, okay? The process that I discussed deals with the knowledge we have now. At the time of Darwin, they didn't even know about genes. They had no concept of genes and how inheritance actually happens. So how are you going to answer this? You're going to give Darwin's theory, but you're going to tailor it to fit the African elephant. So you're going to say that there is a variation, okay, in the population of Fioma. Some of them will have long noses, some of them will have short noses. The long-nosed animals will have a better chance of survival because they will be able to get more food. And since they will be able to get more food, so since they will have a better chance of survival, and they will have a better chance of survival, they will breed more or they will reproduce more, and the gene for long noses is going to be passed on from your parent to offspring, parent to offspring. So this was Darwin's theory. Remember, that was Darwin's theory that there is variation. Because of variation, one species has a better chance of survival. Whoever has a better chance of survival, they will reproduce. They will pass on that trait to their children, and eventually, since since the whoever has the adaptation will have the best chance of survival. That trait will pass through generation until it becomes the dominant trait, right? That was, if you remember, that's what I told you in last class. The one regarding isolation and your natural selection and all that, that's what we know now. That's our current knowledge. We're talking about Darwin's theory. So Darwin had noticed that there is a variation. Then, whoever has the best chance of survival, their genes or their trait is passed from the child to offspring. And eventually, that trait will become dominant. Same thing is going to happen over here, right? There is going to be variation among the Fioma, right? There's going to be variation among the Fioma. Some Fioma will have longer noses, some will have shorter noses.